My name is Aleem Ramtullah. I'm a partner and head of private equity at Developing World Markets, and I'm excited to welcome you all to DWM's inaugural webinar on institutional resilience during this time of stress. We've seen an incredibly positive response to our initial outreach for this first event. If we could go to the next slide. We've had over 100 registered participants from 17 countries and almost evenly split between our portfolio of inclusive financial institutions and impact investors and allocators. As we all must, we're continuing to build our new muscles here in this new scenario, and we'll strive to find new opportunities for these two constituents, both our portfolio companies as well as the investors and LPs, to interact, to share best practices and learn from one another. As all of you have filled out the registration, we also wanted to play back what we think you had indicated, or what the data has indicated to us as what the areas that you were most interested in. I suppose it should come as no surprise for a group of longtime practitioners in financial inclusion that the majority of the participants are trying to look forward and are thinking about how we resume our activities and begin working with clients again. This is obviously made all the more complex when client ratings and grading models using historical data and pre-COVID assumptions have in certain instances become irrelevant, and in assessing creditworthiness across customer segments and sectors. And early warning system indicators are showing misleading signals, causing a loss of predictive capabilities. So for this topic, we are incredibly fortunate to have Bodo Lieberman, the CEO of Sichuan-based MSME lender MC China, with us to discuss how his institution has been navigating the post-crisis landscape in China, and some of these key learnings that might not be intuitive to the rest of us who are still in the midst of the crisis. The next most selected topic was the customer segment and customer engagement to assess financial health and resiliency of clients. Again, as impact practitioners, we've seen the data coming from the World Bank that the economic impact of COVID will be severe. We've understood that it is likely to cause the first increase in global poverty since 1998 by pushing nearly 60 million people into extreme poverty and additional 130 million people into severe food insecurity, of whom nearly 80% will be from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. For the clients of our financial institutions who are already among the lowest income and vulnerable segments of society, further impact to their financial resilience as a result of broken supply chains will obviously pose an existential threat not only for them, but for the institutions that serve them. For this topic, we are extremely fortunate to have Archil Bakuradze, the chairman of Georgia-based microfinance institution Crystal, to discuss his use of natural pathways to better understand the underlying clients and sectors that this has negatively and positively impacted. Before I turn the floor over to Chris Meehan, our Chief Risk Officer, I'd like to highlight a couple of our own quick observations through our close work with the portfolio companies over the last several weeks of the crisis. The first big observation, while all of our organizations are planning for permanent change, we need to challenge the premature declarations of victory. We know the most significant shifts in the sector's competitive rankings occur during moments of crisis. And a crisis like this presents an opportunity as well, an opportunity to overcome institutional inertia. When the status quo doesn't work, you have no choice but to try something new. So most of our organizations understand this imperative and have begun the process to plan for the new normal. It will undoubtedly be a process. Many of our institutions, ourselves included, are at the end of just phase one, where people are able to communicate remotely and normal things begin to work. But we need to fight the urge to declare this a success and keep iterating. Our new reality will be more than just working from home, and the longer we go, the more adaptive we'll need to become. We'll need to learn how to start developing strategy, developing products, and most importantly, building teams and developing people remotely. Teams have spent years working together in close proximity, so can rely on a bit of the shared experience and the muscles developed in that process. But we'll need to instill an agility that's not transient to emerge successful from this crisis. The second and final observation is that we're now in a period where teams are playing offense and defense simultaneously. We're all likely to move to the post-recovery narrative, but we're unlikely to know the exactly the right answer. It may not be as binary as the cartoon on the next slide suggests, but there will be shades of gray. optimism bias is real, as we all, as investors, board members, managers, will all have to challenge the optimism of our worst case scenarios, and help our teams anticipate the new risks that were not on our radar earlier. We've all been hearing the military metaphors across the portfolio. There are war rooms being created, response protocols on war footing or wartime settings. Some of the more innovative companies are talking about OODA loops. I'll offer one more from General Stanley McChrystal, who was the commander of JSOC in the mid-2000s, who told his troops, when you're on the ground, if the order we issued you is wrong, execute the order we should have issued you. So we may not have the luxury of a command and control or strong leaders making bellicose statements to move organizations forward in response to certain twists and turns that we're likely to see. We'll need to prepare our teams to take decisions quickly and confidently, rooted in the goals and objectives of our respective organizations. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Chief Risk Officer, Chris Meehan, to discuss DWM's own global risk and initiatives as a lender to the sector. We look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'll try to be brief and just touch on some points that were our focus over the past month and a half or so, or a few months actually now, as we addressed and started to approach how, from a risk perspective, we should be looking at the COVID-19 kind of pandemic spread. The first idea and the first part of the process was to set up a framework that we could try to analyze and kind of track and monitor the progress of both the pandemic and then the response and impact it was having on our borrowers. So as part of that, we would look at and need to identify key indicators of this and put it into kind of an organized framework. So the country risk obviously is the first area of focus, in that where is COVID now spread, and what kind of penetration level, what kind of containment measures and what kind of regulatory policy and economic resilience are we seeing in these countries as it starts to spread, and potentially as it starts to recover, the economic resilience being a big part of that recovery phase. We're not there yet in most countries. Second part was to break down the components of what, on a specific risk issue with each microfinance business, would be kind of indicators of how they're either prepared and then how they're handling the overall impact as it hits their businesses. And so we set up metrics similar to you would expect, looking at the current KPIs or covenant performance, and then starting to track those as we go into the actual situation as it impacts their businesses. The other one was trying to analyze businesses by geographical concentration, product concentration, because it was clear that different products were going to have different impacts. Finally, we wanted some kind of forward-looking ideas of how things would impact and how they may be able to handle it. And so we look at liquidity and sent out and developed some tools. A liquidity stress test was one that we actually developed with our debt team. It was a way to look at if we have percentage of knockdowns of expected receipts or collections from the portfolio, how much could be handled given the current schedule for debt repayments, and try to get a feel for the ability or the ability that these MFIs might have to handle individual stresses on their liquidity. And finally, ownership. And this is going to be key, I think, for how they weather the other later phases of the structure here, when we do see more actual credit problems coming out the other side, probably of the deferment process or the moratorium process, as the individual MFIs and the customers start to develop an understanding of whether or not their business will succeed and how that's going to impact the credit quality of their portfolios. So we put this together in kind of a reporting framework that we have a couple graphic examples of it in the back. Obviously, it's a pretty wide spreadsheet as it kind of tries to go across and list out all the elements of impact at the regional, the country, and then at the KPI, and finally at kind of results from the liquidity plan. And we can then get an assessment, we think and hope, of how those institutions, the countries, are all handling this, the pandemic, and look to be handling it going forward. Interesting observations from this process were that, one, it was obviously hard to get everybody's full attention. So liquidity plans that we saw were sometimes less than complete. There were also issues with responses that we had to clean up and work with some of the smaller MFIs to better understand and maybe help them better understand their liquidity situation and understand how to put stresses into it and see what the results are. The results were interesting. There were some observations you can see in the chart again on the right, where you can see that regionally we had some better performers in kind of the way we bucketed or scaled. You can see our measurements are they sustain a 30% decrease in collections over a 6-month period, given the amount of liabilities they have in cash on hand and other assets. At 30% for 12 months, for 50% for 6 months, you're looking at the bucketed risk. And so you can see certain areas had better ability to focus their liquidity, which, interesting enough, wasn't necessarily always an indicator of whether or not they were going to require some or request some moratorium. Rather, what we're seeing is as more governments take different policy changes and implement these towards helping, assisting borrowers, especially central banks who have put moratoriums in place for at least from 3 months to almost 9 months in some cases, some mandatory, some voluntary. So as we see more mandatory and we see more proactive central bank action, that actually is a better indicator now of whether or not we're actually receiving requests, or as a lenders group looking at lenders who might have near-term problems simply because of the government policy action. So a lot of what we're seeing in terms of deferments and moratoriums from a government perspective is what's driving more than the individual financial health of those individual MFIs in a lot of cases. So we have countries like El Salvador, who's mandated a required moratorium for all borrowers. There's Kosovo, who's done similar. So we're seeing some MFIs in those spaces that are requiring and requesting, that we put together windows that match the windows for the borrowers that match those for the lenders as well. So I think that liquidity and the solvency are going to come through, as well as maybe some of the country's resilience measures in the second or later phases of this pandemic. In that, as the countries hopefully start to recover, or at least the pandemic itself starts to retreat in those areas, those metrics will give an indication of how resilient the individual MFIs are as they have to address what is mandated roles into probably what likely will be some element of credit issues. And I'm interested to hear from some of our other speakers about that in their own portfolios, and perhaps we will. Because I think that's where we'll turn what is a kind of a mandated process into a credit kind of further more credit impact and analysis process per MFIs. We're still very much in the collection phase, I think, in some cases, in a lot of cases of the portfolio. There are some early indications from those countries which are early movers and also early affected. But the majority of what we're seeing in the emerging markets, the regions we're covering, is kind of we're in the phase one, which is they're starting to track and have to move and see the impact on their portfolios as the pandemic is continuing to spread within those countries. So I don't think we'll really know the credit extent until we start to move into later phases. So that's the observations that we have so far. It's the approach we've taken, and so far, working with others in the industry, we've noted that I think everybody's pretty consistent in their approach. Another very positive development, I think, for both the MFIs as well as the micro investment lenders, is the kind of coming together, if you will, through a number of different communities or different organizational groups to try to come with a more united response. It's important for a couple of reasons. I think we all felt it. One is clearly to offer a stable kind of framework that the MFIs could look to for support consistently from the industry and from the lending groups. And I think that helps them to then balance and understand their financing and funding in a much more stable environment, and then they can address the issues with borrowers, which is clearly a social focus of all of ours. The second part is for the microfinance lenders themselves to understand that there is an agreement amongst us of how we're going to treat individual microfinance companies as individuals, but also as a whole through a consistent process of which we can look to each other for some stability of understanding that we're all in this together and we're all going to kind of roll and or accommodate as well as we can as through universal kind of agreements. So what we've done is as DWM is participate in these forums and hopefully contribute to these forums in ways that allow us to develop this universal understanding. It's been extremely positive. One of the ones that we participate in has created an MOU, if you will. It's not binding, but it is, it is obviously a gentleman's agreement, or I should say these days a general person's agreement, to ensure that we all kind of move together and have a common understanding. And we created this MOU, which puts together a framework for consideration and kind of offers stages and phases which we consider certain reactions and certain universal kind of treatments of the different microfinance companies as we review those cases as they're presented to us, usually through approaches from those companies to the lenders. And so that way we have a kind of a consistent approach. Also, an approach that allows us to stay away from having to do formal processes initially, as we can move more quickly without those legal processes and also avoid the initial costs of those. It won't be true in all cases, but at least we have a framework which allows us to deal with, I think, a vast majority of the issues through this process. Finally, we've also kind of worked together to come up with standardized tools. We've contributed to this stress test I mentioned before. We've shared this with other members of the community, and they've also shared their tools back. We have kind of a resilience assessment tool that was shared by one of the DFIs, so which was very helpful in kind of putting together kind of an assessment of, again, how strong the country was to meet the crisis and the process of pushing back on the pandemic and supporting the economy and the finance community. So it's been a very constructive, I think, process for the industry, for all participants, for the MFIs, hopefully, and for the lenders as well. And with that, I will pass it on to our speakers.
Hi, everyone. This is Siddharth Sultan. I'm an associate at Developing World Markets based in Singapore. I will introduce our first guest speaker for the webinar today, Bodo Lieberman, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Microcredit China. Bodo has been serving as the CEO of Microcredit China since March 2017. DWM as an organization has been involved in Microcredit China as an investor since the inception of the company in 2015, and with the broader Microcredit Group since 2008. At Microcredit China, Bodo has been driving the company to reach a dominant position in a rapidly changing market environment through digital transformation and partnerships. He has been instrumental in effecting a quick turnaround institutional response to address the impact of COVID-19, leveraging over 15 years of experience in financial inclusion. Prior to Microcredit China, Bodo has worked across several Microcredit subsidiaries across Africa. And prior to joining the Microcredit Group, Bodo was the general manager at Novo Banco in Mozambique and president and CEO of Micro Enterprise Bank in Philippines. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Bodo to begin his presentation.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Siddharth, for this kind introduction. And also thank you for DWM for organizing this webinar and for giving us the opportunity to share our COVID-19 experience. You know, China has been the first country that has been affected And it might give you some indications how this crisis could go for you. Of course, every country is different, every company is different, but yeah, it could still be interesting to you, for you to see how we experienced this very special times. So just quickly about Microcred China. So it's part of Baobab Group based in Paris. And we also have subsidiaries in 9 different African countries, partly banks, partly microfinance institutions, but also offering a wide range of services. In China, we are since 2007. We are operating as a microcredit company in 46 different branches and outlets in Sichuan province that you can see there on the right-hand side, one of the provinces in the center of China. In China, we can only give loans, no other services to micro entrepreneurs and to SMEs, up to 1.5 million CNY, which is about 192,000 euro. 90% of our loans are uncollateralized, so which is the sector which the banks usually are afraid to serve. And our approach is more the traditional cash flow based lending methodology, with the loan officers going to the clients doing the assessment. So rather HR intensive, and we are also now in the process of digitalization. So it is an ongoing process, and as you will see later, it has also been now accelerated by this crisis. Key figures, 191 million euro, portfolio at risk 0.9%, and about 530 employees. So yeah, how we experienced this crisis. So I remember very well, on the 17th of January, we still celebrated the Chinese New Year. We were with all the employees, so more than 500 people for 7 hours in a big ballroom in a hotel in Nanchong. So it was the perfect environment actually for the virus to spread out. But luckily, none of our staff was affected. And also, if you look at the official figures for the province of Sichuan, which has 80 million inhabitants, so basically the size of Germany, there were only 561 confirmed cases and only 3 deaths. Those were the official figures. But it's true that the Chinese government had reacted very quickly in Sichuan province before the virus could spread out. So it was a complete lockdown before the end of the Chinese New Year holidays. All the branches were closed. All the staff had to work remotely from home. And that also means we could not have direct contact with our clients. And also our clients' businesses were all closed. So basically no customers, no revenues, and which heavily affected their cash flow. And then after about a month, the first branches of Microcred were allowed to open again. And also then there was a process, a slow process from the beginning of March, basically up to now, that also our clients' businesses opened again, or were allowed to open. And now the last businesses, which were like cinemas and kindergartens, they were the last ones that were allowed to open in the end of April. So how did we, what actions did we take as a company? Yeah, we did a restructuring of a number of loans of our clients that were the most heavily affected by this crisis. So in most of the cases, we just did a deferral of principal payments. So for up to 2 months, the client only paid the interest. In some other cases, we did also complete restructuring of the loans. This was our principle. We wanted to support our clients. We wanted to show them that we are a reliable partner, that they can count on us. And this was also very much appreciated by our clients. During this time, we also had a special pricing in February and March, where we waived the commission fee completely, so the price was lower, and this was also encouraged by the Chinese government. And we also had another special pricing for individuals and companies that had a special contribution to the epidemic. For example, doctors, pharmacies, or producers of masks that had another 10% interest discount. Then we did, this was one of the first things we did was to assess the impact on our portfolio. So you see here the portfolio breakdown by sector. So first of all, we classified all different sectors that we had by the impact, so either serious impact, moderate or mild or no impact. And then this was basically a personal assessment of our CRO, who went through the list and gave this assessment. And there you see the outcome. So 4.3% was serious impact. So this gave already a first indication of the situation. Then afterwards, we did the breakdown by individual clients. So there, each loan officer had to give the assessment for their clients, and then we came up with this, which was also the basis for the decision to do this restructuring or rescheduling. And then also our innovation team did a very good job in creating a special dashboard for the COVID-19. So there on the left-hand side, you see also there's this different categories I talked about the impact and the restructured portfolio. Below the portfolio at risk for each of the category. On the right-hand side, you see the portfolio split by the different restructurings that we did during the different months, and also portfolio at risk. So this was also one of the achievements that we very quickly were able to create those dashboards in order to have a good insight and also good follow-up. Of course, those are just examples. It can be also broken down up to each individual client. Then we reinforced the risk controls. So we adjusted the underwriting authority and the approval levels according to the level of experience and portfolio at risk of each individual underwriter. So it became a bit stricter. This was for the time after after we could start dispersing again. And what we also had, we have an automatic renewal that was then also suspended up to June. So we did have to visit every single client before we renewed the loan. We also had different training for the loan officers and the branch managers. A note about the risk control in this special situation. We had an online training that was conducted and gave answers to the questions: what are the most affected sectors, restaurant, bars, hotel, KTV, cinemas, schools and kindergartens. How do we assess the new repayment capacity during this crisis? So how long has a business been closed? What is the current percentage and level of sales? How do we monitor the clients on distance if we cannot visit them? What are the means in terms of communication? And also, what is the short-term and the long-term impact for the clients, and how does this influence later on also our loan decision? And here you see it's quite interesting, our disbursement achievement before, during, and after the crisis. And you look at the disbursement graph, you see it really looks like a V shock with a very low month of February, but then already in March we were almost back to a normal level, and this was also confirmed in April. So this was quite interesting to see. And then also the percentage of the restructured loans with below 13% in February, then below 7% in March, and then 1.8% in April. And we also agreed that we still, in exceptional cases, would do some further restructuring for those cases where it is really necessary, but we still have an ongoing business, of course. Then the financial impact. So first of all, there also the Chinese government was quite active, and we got through tax benefits and social security cost savings of 810,000 euros. So for example, for 6 months, we didn't have to pay any social security for our staff. Additional cost savings that we did, mainly we renegotiated the rent with the landlord, and we postponed any salary increases. We did stress testing to come up with different scenarios and the financial impact for this year. And the latest figures confirm that we will achieve between 60 and 80% of the original profit target for this year. Then the risks, of course, which is the most important now, is to see how does the restructured portfolio behave in terms of repayment. Are we able to manage this well? The first indication is rather positive. So a very large part repays the loans, but yeah, since it's in some cases only the interest payment, we have to see how this develops. And also, of course, the long-term impact of the global economic recession. Our type of client is not so much dependent on import and export, so we hope that this will not have such a big impact also in the coming months or even years, because the global economic recession will certainly come. But then you should not only look at the risk, but also see the opportunities of this crisis. This was clearly an acceleration of the digitalization process that was already ongoing, but was now much faster. In the very beginning, we just sent SMS to agree on the restructuring, but then very quickly our development team was able to have electronic contracts for the restructuring, so we could also do this through this means. Also the dashboards that I mentioned, also we proved that it's working from home is possible, and the digital sharing tools that we already used before are very commonly accepted and works well. We now did all the branch manager meetings remotely, and we will even continue doing this. And also, I think, a common understanding about the need for rapid digitalization. This was one of the key issues. But we could also enhance the loyalty to our clients, because they have seen that we are there to help them and to support them, and also to our staff, because we didn't lay off any person or reduce salaries. So I think this was also very much appreciated by our staff. To sum up the key learnings, most of the things I already mentioned. First was the quick recovery in terms of disbursements. This was not something that we initially expected, but also very positively surprised by the measures taken by the Chinese government in terms of support, but also in terms of prevention. The good collaboration and communication, even at distance, between Microcred and its clients, but also the good repayment that we are now seeing or starting to see after this restructuring, but also for the 80% of the clients that were not restructured. the financial impact is definitely there, but not as big as we initially expected. Digitalization is absolutely necessary. It helped us where we had it already, and it was somehow limiting us where it was not yet done. And of course, also the data management to get a clear overview and to make sure that we can follow up on everything. So this was the experience that I wanted to share.
I'm Suma Swaminathan, a VP on the private equity team at DWM. And it's my great pleasure today to introduce our next speaker, Archil Bakaradze, who is the chairman of Crystal in Georgia. Archil is the co-founder of Crystal and has led it from, he along with his co-founders has led it from being an NGO back in the late 90s that was serving internally displaced persons to transforming to a microfinance organization in 2007 to now being one of the leading financial institutions in Georgia. At DWM, we've been lucky enough to be partners with Archil and the Crystal team on the debt side from the time of the transformation and also as the first institutional equity investor in Crystal. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Archil to talk us through what Crystal has been doing to respond to the COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you, Suma, and dear colleagues. This is a great opportunity to, first of all, thank you, DWM, for your unwavering support and leadership across the crisis. And this is not the first time for Crystal to feel that, and for your very thoughtful approach to the business you're doing and also to your clients, who Crystal is one of them. And obviously, we are in a position to then pass this support to hundreds of thousands of our customers. Let me firstly tell you about Crystal briefly, and then go quickly to the COVID-19 and how this pandemic unfolded in Georgia and where we stand now in a fight against it. I'm conscious of my time is a bit limited, so I'll try to make it quicker than I was going to. So Crystal is largest by a loan portfolio non-banking financial company. We serve more than 100,000 customers across country. Our country is smaller than Sichuan province, where we have up to 4 million customers, 20 times smaller than Bodo mentioned. But it's a quite large country. We have 48 branches. We are in a micro financing and a micro business, micro enterprise financing, which means we have a more human input here. So we have 1,000 members of staff doing this job. And for your information, in terms of country outreach, as a not very big organization, obviously, one of the largest among banks, but we're covering 10% of Georgia's population. So with this branch network, with our customers and considering their families, we're covering 10.8% of country's population. So things we shall tell you about our customers will very much speak about Georgia in general, especially that sort of hardworking, micro entrepreneurial group of people who are making practically half of the Georgia's workforce. The size of our loan portfolio is about $100,000, and we are one of the first, probably the first non-banking financial institution, which was rated by Fitch Ratings with still B stable rating. We're waiting for the mission to come next week to give us further assessment. And obviously, Crystal has been recognized as a socially responsible player, and we have received Nation's Responsible Business Award in 2018. So, as I mentioned, 4 million, up to 4 million population of Georgia. First case recorded was on February 26th, and government made a very bold decisions, moved very fast, introducing state of emergency on the March 20th already. So this is a number of daily cases. So maximum daily cases we had is 42, which is not bad. So as of now, we stand at 615 cases with, unfortunately, 9 people dying. Again, which is compared to many developed nations, this is practically very positive statistics. So I think government's decisive actions and support of international community made it possible for us to get that pandemic under control. So first wave has practically almost been finished without much human cost. But Georgia has got a huge hit on economy. We're the country with one of the major sectors of our GDP is tourism. Another sort of important contributor to our foreign currency inflows is remittances. It's roughly 12% compared to GDP. So together we have now been affected by this huge loss of revenues. Tourism has practically stopped and revenues have decreased. We don't know how deep this decrease will be because we will be depending on obviously countries where our migrant workers are present. But one of the scenarios which we've chosen for our scenario planning anticipated a loss of the half of the remittances. So I won't go into details, but one thing to be mentioned that a country has made a big weight on human life. So a lot of things happen to protect human life. We have been impressed with the with the action of the government, of the regulator. This was the first time when we saw government listen to specialists and epidemiologists. Medical workers have been put on the center of the decision-making process. And obviously that has had its positive impact. This graph below is what happened with the Georgian lari. We have free floating currency, obviously, and you can see that as soon as we got this pandemic, there was a huge devaluation of Georgian lari. However, with sort of, and this is usual with free floating currencies, then we got a normalization and we, I think, get to the new equilibrium, which is roughly 10% depreciation year to date. So again, country is now with one time, and country is well equipped with good testing, tracing, and containment infrastructure. Obviously, our tourism infrastructure is helping us to convert some of the spaces for a large-scale quarantine places. And the Georgians have not, had any issue with this. People appreciated this, severe lockdowns and even curfew, because people in a pretty disciplined way went to this new unfortunate circumstances. So we are not, new to crisis. We had a crisis in 2008 when we had a war, short but quite a sort of difficult war with our neighbor. And now we have 2020 crisis. In fact, we have two crises in between of a lesser extent, obviously. So in a way, we're used to weathering crisis. But I should tell you that economically, 2020 COVID-19 crisis is probably going to be the deepest. That's not only our estimation, but it's the estimation of all decision makers or commentators who know and understand Georgia. However, to all these crises, we have four things in common in terms of how to manage it. We are usually, and that was done in a most, I would say, to the credit of our management, in a most smooth manner. We have made a very good crisis response. We have, as soon as we finished that, company started an impact assessment where the governance level also got involved, our board. We've been active in stakeholder management. And obviously we have already managed to assess impact and look at the future with some certainty and come up with a new strategy. And I'll try to, in a matter of maybe 5 minutes, really, not too long, to give you an idea of how Crystal confronted this, I would say, once in a generation crisis. So very little sort of description of crisis response. It's a good thing we had business continuity plan in place. And in fact, that mentioned the possibility of epidemics. We didn't necessarily envisage this type of pandemic, but it did say everything companies should do in order to be operational. And we followed that. Immediately, the business continuity management team has been put in place, as we call it differently, as a crisis nerve center. And that was a group of managers below C-level. Essentially, this was people managed by our chief officers, but it was quite a sort of broad group of people who was and is still doing a perfect job in keeping the operation ongoing. I will say that first emphasis was made on the safety of our staff, because obviously we wanted not only protect our staff, but we wanted Crystal not to become a source of an infection, because obviously, as you know, Georgia is still predominantly cash-based, especially when it comes to microfinance. So cash was one of the sources of this spread of the virus, and that's why we wanted to make sure that we do everything we can not to become contributors to this spread, and essentially by doing this to contain this virus. So what happened is that we moved 70% of all the staff to homes. Essentially, headquarters has moved completely smoothly to remote operation. That was possible due to our sort of prior development and investment in online collaboration channels such as Microsoft Teams and other 365 applications. So that was pretty easy. Whereas we decided to move to shifts into the branches and leave only a limited number of people who would essentially carry on the minimum business operations of the branches. In fact, during the curfew, Georgia government defined number of sectors which were allowed to operate, and among those limited sectors, such as pharmacies and medical institutions, was banks and MFIs. Our regulator felt very strong that MFIs should not be closed because they are very critical infrastructure for access to finance. So as soon as we ensured well-being and safety of our staff, then obviously all of the emphasis was made on the customers, and I'm quite proud actually with the decision of the private sector. Large banks were in avant-garde of these decisions, and I think Crystal was one of the first to follow. The idea was we should do something which would fit the situation, knowing our customers, knowing the level of their savings, the dependency on the daily income. We understood that this would be very difficult for them to operate in these conditions of a lockdown. Plus, we wanted just to create just physical social distancing for that. Therefore, all major institutions decided to adopt a policy of a grace period. So 3 months grace period was given to all of our customers unless they wanted to opt out. Why this decision was important is that it's a simple decision. It goes through public channels, it goes through SMS. It's impossible to call 100,000 people immediately. And we obviously it involved a lot of collaboration with the National Bank of Georgia, because there are certain customer protection rules which don't allow you to change things, but everything went pretty smooth. I should mention that we used very actively WhatsApp. So all government vertical and NBG vertical was quickly put on the WhatsApp with our association in place, and all this communication went very, very very impressively. So we did that, and that was a very good decision. Still, 1/3 of customers opted out from this program. They decided to carry on with their payments and not to stop their payments. But after I'll explain about our survey, that decision was highly appreciated. So customers definitely valued this step from Crystal. Impact assessment included a range of actions, including scenario planning. I won't go into details of that. It's quite an interesting thing, but I think one of the features of our risk assessment was a customer survey. We had no idea what to compare to. We looked at Hispanic, Spanish flu, as you know, the beginning of 19th century. And so just to get an idea of what could happen with the economy, but it was far remote experience. So we couldn't do anything except just call people and ask what are they doing, how much impact was made on their businesses, on their revenues, and what their sort of propensity to repay, what they need from us, etc. So it was quite a big questionnaire. And that was one aspect of our survey, of our research. Another aspect was a granular qualitative assessment of each revenue sector which we have. So we have 150 subsectors. So we chosen 38 most important ones and decided to really analytically understand what's going to happen with these sectors, and are they going to be adaptable to new circumstances? How much of revenues will they lose, and therefore what is anticipated, expected credit loss? So that was our biggest question. I'll show you a couple of slides from this survey. So this is essentially, this survey shows revenue brackets before COVID and after COVID. So it was a very visible reduction in sort of revenues. Actually, half of our customers essentially reported loss of revenues. I mean, this next slide, I want to stop here. It's anticipated decrease in family income. So you can see still, almost half of people anticipate decrease in their income, which is a huge number. But when we asked what happened with their revenues, they said that 75% experienced in this lockdown either full cessation or partial decrease of revenues. Obviously, we believe that after phased opening, this number will improve. Suma, do I have some 5 minutes to continue, or should I go to the conclusions? What would be the right sort of way of managing time? Because I'm conscious of letting people ask questions.
Yeah, thanks, Archil. If we can do a quick overview of the sectoral and keep it to the next 2 minutes, we can then have a few minutes left for questions at the end.
Yes, as I mentioned already, we've done also sectoral analysis. I will stop here, but we identified, sectors which were affected least, or mild, or most affected, and that also helped us to ascertain the impact of this crisis on our credit portfolio. Obviously, the reality of our customers is that many of them have several revenue streams. So there's a microfinance reality. Many families have more than one member who have a regular income. Therefore, we also believe that microfinance is really very well positioned to help people to be mobile, to move from affected sectors to less affected sectors. And therefore, we come up with some quite a sort of, we're quite confident with our estimation. It's not an easy picture. We're still sort of looking at financial impact of it, but it's not something which is going to put us in a sort of solvency risk, for example, or in a risk of violating the regulatory headrooms. So again, this is not an easy experience. We don't think we will project any profit this year, and it's very good to see this. Obviously, in our optimistic scenarios, we have an idea that loss will be limited, but we are not sort of optimistic about this year. Maybe better next year. However, we believe that 2022 should be absolutely sort of a year of growth, hopefully, after we weather this crisis. So we've done a lot in terms of stakeholder management and new strategy. And one of the things I want to show you is how our new strategy looks. Just a couple of headlines. We are very much focused on data analysis, just to make individual solutions, offer individual solutions to people as they come up out of this crisis. We are focused on development of distance channels, something which we've started before, but now it's been hugely accelerated. We want to make our operation cashless and paperless. Therefore, we are very actively investing our efforts in creation of electronic payment channels. And finally, we are focused on development of new services which will provide customers with what we call broader access to finance, access to market through e-commerce, access to technology and knowledge. So this is all, that's not new for Crystal, that's been something in development, but it's all been seriously accelerated during the crisis. So never let a good crisis go to waste. And thank you very much for your good attention. I think we allowed a little bit for questions.
Thank you very much for that. Very insightful. We are a little bit short on time, but I think we have time for a few questions. A quick introduction. My name is Ashwin Mahabaleshwar. I am a director on the firm's private equity team, and I also lead our debt origination efforts in Asia. So we'll start off with a couple of questions. First question, and this is for both Bodo and for Archel. So perhaps we can go in that order with Bodo starting. And this is the question that we had put up initially, as the webinar opened. So it'll be interesting to see what our participants think as well. And it is, what is the strongest determinant of institutional resiliency in a crisis? Is it a strong wartime leader? Is it having a flexible investor base, comprehensive business continuity plan, culture of institutional risk management, or a strong customer relationship? I would love to get both your thoughts on that. Perhaps we can start with Bodo.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so I believe, and I think it also came out a little bit during my presentation, that the strong customer relationship is really the key to success. Of course, you have to also manage them in this crisis situation digitally. But our approach is to have proximity to our customers. And I think this is the reason why always we are managing to have a very high quality of the portfolio, and why we also managed to relatively smoothly go through this crisis. So definitely the last point.
Thanks very much, Bodo. What about your thoughts, Archel?
I think it's really a combination of those factors. It's very difficult to single out one of them. I think, people are important, but systems are also important. And, prudency generally is a good thing for also on a regulation level. Georgia spent last 2-3 years in reforming its prudential regulation and improving its lending standards, and that helped us very well because we've got much healthier portfolios to this crisis, and those sort of counter-cyclical measures are important, specifically for this type of crisis. And we've been very sort of negative about this, and usually people are critical because profits are suffering at good times when you have to slow down or make prudent decisions or create reserves. But this is good now when we have such a crisis. So I think systems, environment, people, everything is important. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Archel. Alim, do we have the poll results? So I don't know if you all can all see this on your screens. The top two that our participants have ranked are leading with a culture of institutional risk management, and second, having a strong customer relationship. I think that kind of gels with a lot of what the speakers have said. Starting off with DWM's risk, and also Archel, what you mentioned, the overall environment in of itself. So we wanted, firstly, thank you to the participants for all of the questions. So we wanted to start off, we have time for maybe a couple. So the first question, and this is to Bodo. And Bodo, this kind of ties in, and this is a question from Radhika. It ties into what you mentioned, right? So what was kind of a counterintuitive or unexpected insight, as NC China was opening up. We have this kind of unique lens where China is in a position where it's a little bit ahead. And Radhika's specific question was, after the lockdowns opened up, what kind of collection efficiency did you see in the first month? I think you mentioned a little bit on your slide as well that was a little bit idiosyncratic. So love your thoughts on that.
I think this counterintuitive insight was definitely that basically business went very quickly back to normal in terms of disbursement. I showed the graph, and initially also we expected that it would gradually going up, and only in the second half of the year would be back to normal levels. So I think this was very positive, and wasn't to be expected initially. And about the collection efficiency, also we were rather positively surprised. Of course, we did reschedule payments and restructured loans, but in the end, 98% of all clients basically now in the last month of April respected their repayment obligations. So that was also rather positively and not necessarily to be expected initially.
Okay, thanks, Bodo. And we are a little bit short on time, so we're going to do the one question prior to closing out. Maybe we can start with Archil on this. And this is a question from Murli at Smile, which is very timely as we're talking about learnings from the recent experience after lockdowns open up. So it is, how are we preparing? How are both of your companies preparing for the next wave that's potentially going to hit later this year? So maybe we can start with Archil and then Bodo.
Our scenario planning takes into account this possibility of resurgence of the virus. It would be great bonus if that won't happen, but we are prepared for repetitive, reoccurrences of the virus, and therefore government lockdowns, which will automatically mean that again we will have maybe shorter term problems. I mean, Crystal is ready, the country is ready, people are much more aware of things. Therefore, we believe that even until the medication is found, or we achieve, a wide scale, wide-scale immunity through vaccine, which will probably take 12 to 18 months, we believe. I think there might be repetitive, lockdowns, and company is ready in all senses, and I think customers are also better prepared to what expect. We don't think that this is going to be like problem is over and everything goes back to normal. We don't count on this luxury. So if it happens, that's great.
Yes, so from my side, I think especially in China, there is a big risk that there will be a second wave, because very few people in comparison to the size of the population are immune because they had been infected before. So definitely there is a risk that this could happen again. Of course, both the government, the population, and we as a company, we are better prepared now than before everything started, because we have this experience already. As I said, we are now much more accelerating our digitalization, which will then also help us to also be prepared better for a second wave. So this is at the moment our priority, to work on everything that could help us managing better this situation than for the first wave.
Great, thanks very much, Bodo, Archil. With that, we're just going to take a couple of minutes to wrap up. Apologies, everyone, that we've run a few minutes past a schedule, but I'm just going to request that we take like 2 or 3 minutes extra to close out. So firstly, I'd like to thank our panelists, Archil and Bodo, and as is customary, we'd like to extend a gift to you, but in these times it's going to be a virtual gift. So we'd like to give you an ebook which is actually written by Alex Lazaro, who's a friend and classmate of Alim's. And it's the book is called Out Innovate: How Global Entrepreneurs Are Rewriting the Rules of Silicon Valley, all the way from Delhi to Detroit. So we'll be sending that across to you in appreciation for today. Thank you very much. It was very insightful.
Thanks to you.
A couple of housekeeping items. Just want to mention to all our participants on the call, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. We are going to be doing a follow-up webinar next month. So today's webinar is talking about the experiences of our portfolio companies. We are working with our portfolio companies to garner customer level insights on what have been the impacts of COVID on SMEs, on the end borrowers. And we're going to be presenting the results of that on our next webinar in June. So please stay tuned. Secondly, a request. We will be sending out a quick survey post the seminar. It shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. So we'd very much appreciate your feedback on that quick poll. And finally, I just wanted to share some additional resources that we have, and this is basically part of our continuing practice of sharing best practices of tools that we have available here at DWM and across our portfolio. We'll be sending on request. If you'll reach out, we'll be happy to send you the liquidity stress tests that we have available, which is best in class across our portfolio. Similarly, customer surveys that our portfolio companies have undertaken, so templates for that. And finally, this is something that Chris referenced, which is our DWM debt/risk liquidity stress tool that we've used. So if you could, send across and email to us. We're available. I think it should be up on the screen shortly as well. Please feel free to contact any of the members of the private equity team. Thanks again for your participation. Thank you to the speakers, and look forward to seeing you on next month's follow-up webinar. Thank you very much.